All right, for this session, we're going to be examining the sources on a case that is just, it's staggering in its scope.
It really is. It spanned over 4 decades.
And crossed the entire country, really. Ultimately, it took these huge leaps in science to bring any kind of resolution.
That's right.
So our goal today is a really rigorous, impartial look at the information we have on the Bear Brook murders. Most people know them as the Allenstown Four.
And our focus is to really extract the key knowledge from this because it's an incredibly complex cold case.
We're going to trace that whole journey, right, from these anonymous victims to finally their full identification.
And this is such a difficult, tragic case. It centers on 4 female victims.
3 of them just young children?
Exactly. The basic facts are, well, they're heartbreaking. The remains of all 4 were found in 2 separate 55-gallon drums.
Hidden away deep inside Bear Brook State Park in Allenstown, New Hampshire.
And the timeline, that's what's so shocking. The first discovery wasn't until November 10th, 1985.
Right, which means an adult woman and 1 little girl lay there unidentified for years.
For decades. And the discovery itself was piecemeal, which just added to the confusion for investigators at the time.
Because the second discovery didn't happen until May 9th, 2000.
15 years later. 15 years of missed clues, of just lingering uncertainty.
And the autopsies determined they all died from blunt trauma.
Yes, and they believe the murders happened sometime in a window between 1977 and 1981.
Which really highlights the killers, his operational period, and just how cold this case was from the start.
When you think about the scale of it, 4 human beings, a mother and 3 girls who had no names for all those decades, you just have to imagine the void.
For the families who were searching, not knowing.
Exactly, not knowing if they just left or if something horrible had happened.
And it's that anonymity, that void, that really made this investigation a landmark moment in forensic science.
It absolutely became a case study in persistence, both from law enforcement and, from this dedicated community of civilian genealogists.
And the ability of modern science, especially genetic genealogy, to finally break through that wall of silence. That's the real turning point in this story.
It is. It gave closure to families who had been missing their loved ones for nearly half a century.
So that's the journey we'll follow. We'll start with those initial baffling discoveries.
Mm.
Then we'll move through the scientific advances that gave them these small clues, from isotopes to familial DNA, all the way to the identifications in 2019 and the final one in 2025.
It's a story about how technology can intersect with, good old-fashioned police work and the efforts of just regular people.
So let's start with that discovery timeline because it's so unusual for what was essentially a single crime.
It is. On November 10th, 1985, a hunter was in Bear Brook State Park.
And he just stumbled upon it.
He did. He found a metal 55-gallon drum near the site of an old burned-down store.
And inside,
wrapped carefully in plastic, were the remains of an adult female, estimated age 23 to 33, and a young girl, about 8 to 10.
And the remains were very degraded at that point.
Severely. They were skeletonized. But that plastic wrapping was a huge initial clue.
Because it suggests a very deliberate concealment.
Exactly. A premeditated effort to dispose of them and to, prevent identification through decomposition or animals.
And the initial autopsies were clear they were dealing with a double murder.
Yes. Cause of death for both was blunt trauma. So this was extreme violence. Investigators knew right away it was murder, not just a hidden death.
But their identities were a total mystery.
Completely unknown. They were literally people without names.
And that lack of identity was marked by this very poignant public acknowledgement. They didn't have a name, but they were given some dignity.
They were. And you can see that reverence and also that helplessness in the inscription on the tombstone where the first 2 were buried in Allenstown.
What did it say?
It read, "Here lies the mortal remains known only to God of a woman aged 23-33 and a girl child aged 8-10.
Known only to God."
It continues. Their slain bodies were found on November 10th, 1985 in Bear Brook State Park. May their souls find peace in God's loving care. Just think about that. That headstone stood for decades as a symbol of New Hampshire's most baffling cold case.
And then 15 years later, May 2000, the tragedy essentially doubles.
In the same area, a second drum is found. Inside, the remains of 2 more young girls.
And the sources seem to suggest that this delay was because the initial crime scene investigation back in '85 just wasn't complete.
Precisely. It was a major investigative flaw, though you can kind of understand it given the circumstances.
How far away was it?
The second drum was only about 100 yards from the first, but it was just outside the original crime scene perimeter they set up in 1985.
So they just didn't search far enough.
It seems so. The theory is that the initial investigators, they weren't expecting a second container. They were in dense woods, and they just didn't extend that perimeter far enough.
That detail is just chilling. That the answers for 2 other victims were deleted by a few hundred feet.
It is. But the method, the metal drum, the blunt force trauma, it strongly reinforced the idea that a single person was responsible for all 4.
And that they all died around the same time, between 1977 and 1981.
Yes. So, with the remains being largely skeletonized, investigators had very little to go on. They had to rely on really meticulous anthropological work.
So what were those key physical markers they were clinging to for all those years?
This initial phase was all about anthropology drawing conclusions from bone structure, from dental work.
Right.
So for the adult female, who we now know as Marlise Honeychurch, she was estimated to be 23 to 33. Caucasian, with maybe a hint of Native American ancestry, height between 5'2" and 5'7".
And her teeth were important,
The
Rilla.
most important detail, she had significant dental work, multiple fillings, 3 extractions.
A distinctive dental signature, that can sometimes point to a region, can it?
Exactly. The type of fillings used in the 70s might hint at a certain kind of dentistry in a specific area. It was a critical but ultimately a very frustrating early lead.
And what about the girls? They each had unique features that investigators hoped someone, a family member, would recognize.
Yes. The oldest girl, later identified as Marie Vaughn, she was estimated between 7 and 11. She had physical signs of having been ill, symptoms consistent with pneumonia.
And her teeth were also distinct.
Very. She had a crooked front tooth and a diastema, a noticeable gap between her top front teeth. She also had 2 earrings in each ear and, importantly, no dental fillings at all.
Which was a sharp contrast with the adult victim.
A very sharp contrast.
Mhm.
Then there was the middle child.
The one who turned out to be genetically separate from the others.
Right. Rhea Rasmussen. She was aged between 2 and 4. Her profile included a gap between her front teeth and an overbite that was probably very noticeable when she was alive.
And she was quite small.
Very small, maybe 3'8", and there were signs she might have suffered from anemia. For a child that young, those features, the overbite, the gap, they're incredibly specific. They were just desperate for someone to recognize them.
And finally, the youngest child, Sarah Lynn McWaters.
Estimated at 1 to 3 years old, she was very small, had long blonde or light brown hair, and she also had that gap between her front teeth.
So with so little solid evidence, the facial reconstructions became just paramount.
Absolutely. When you hit a wall with traditional police work, you turn to visualization. You have to try to jog the public's memory.
And the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, NCMEC, they were heavily involved.
They were. They released several reconstructions, updating them as the technology got better, especially in 2013 and 2015.
And these later versions used the dental information.
Yes, they used advanced forensic tech to show exactly how the unique tooth and jaw structures would have affected the appearance of their faces.
I find the detail about the color or the lack of it so striking that they had to create these images in black and white.
They did. And that choice really underlines the limitations they were working with.
Because there was just no way to know.
No way at all. From skeletonized remains, you can't definitively determine skin tone or eye color. So they had to present a face based purely on bone structure, just hoping a parent or a sibling would look at that shape, the jawline, the specific spacing of the teeth, and recognize someone they loved.
So for almost 30 years, that's what they had, physical descriptions and missing persons files. Then in 2014, the first big scientific breakthrough happened.
This was the moment DNA finally provided some real context. The first analysis used mitochondrial DNA, or mtDNA.
And that's passed down from the mother.
Exclusively from the mother, which makes it a perfect tool for tracing maternal lines. And in 2014, the test revealed that the adult woman, the oldest girl, and the youngest girl all shared a maternal line.
So they knew they were related, but not exactly how.
Correct. But a year later, by 2015, more testing confirmed the specific relationship. The woman was the biological mother of those 2 girls.
Which is a huge investigative step.
Huge. It immediately focuses the search on a missing family unit, a mother who vanished with 2 of her daughters. It confirmed the horrible possibility that the killer had wiped out an entire immediate family.
And that brings us back to the middle child, Ray Rasmussen, the 2 to 4-year-old, the genetic outlier.
She was the key puzzle piece. The fact she was unrelated to the others added this layer of profound complexity.
It's just a very specific dynamic.
It does. Either the killer murdered the mother and her children, and then separately murdered his own daughter and put them together. Or, and this is more likely, he was living with the mother and her children and his own daughter at the time of the murders.
So the focus narrows to the person connecting them all.
The one person linking the adult victim to the unrelated child. Exactly.
So with the relationships established by DNA, they needed to know where they were from. And this is where the science gets really fascinating, the isotopic evidence.
Yeah, isotopic analysis is basically high-tech forensic geography.
How does that work? How does the water or soil tell you someone's history?
It analyzes the ratios of stable elements, oxygen, carbon, strontium, that are preserved in a person's bones and teeth.
From the food and water they consume.
Precisely. We absorb these elements from our local environment. And since the ratios of these elements vary by geography, by geology, you can essentially create a map of where a person lived, especially in early childhood when your teeth are forming.
So what did the isotopes say about the mother and her two related daughters?
The initial evidence suggested they were relatively recent residents in that area of New Hampshire.
So they were local.
The data showed they lived in the northeastern U.S. for somewhere between 2 weeks and 3 months right before they died. So they weren't just passing through, they were living there or had just arrived.
But the profile for the middle child, Rasmussen's daughter, was completely different.
Completely. It indicated a much more transient background. Her initial analysis suggested she spent most of her formative years in either the upper Northeast or the upper Midwest. Wisconsin was even mentioned as a possibility.
So it told a story of movement.
A major relocation during her short life, which was in stark contrast to the rest of the family unit. And as we now know, that's entirely consistent with the killer's profile.
And the sources say that later, as the tech got better, that geographical assessment was refined even more.
It was. That refinement in 2019 was critical. Newer, more precise testing suggested the non-related child most likely came from a broader Western region.
Not the Midwest.
No, specifically Arizona, Texas, California, or Oregon. This revision was a vital clue. It emphasized a cross-country travel history, starting from the West Coast.
Which aligned perfectly with the man they would eventually identify as the killer.
Perfectly. It showed his transient life was consistent right from the earliest geological data recorded in his own daughter's teeth.
And this is where the whole story pivots. It moves from identifying the victims to identifying their killer.
And the breakthrough came from a completely different case. The 1981 disappearance of a woman named Denise Bowden from Manchester, New Hampshire.
That connection was officially announced in January 2017.
Right. Denise Bowden vanished around Thanksgiving, 1981, with her young daughter and her boyfriend, a man who was using the name Robert Bob Evans.
And Manchester is close to Allenstown?
Very close. That geographical proximity immediately raised suspicion that this Bob Evans might be the link.
So they did DNA testing, hoping the adult victim in the barrel was Denise Bowden.
It was a hope that was quickly dashed. The DNA confirmed the adult victim was not Denise Bowden.
But the connection to Bob Evans became the most important lead they'd ever had.
Because he was the one leaving this trail of missing people across the country. The entire focus shifted to tracing Evans. He was the common thread.
And tracing him meant uncovering this decades-long pattern of deception. This is where the chameleon killer moniker really starts to take shape.
He was a master of evasion. His trail led investigators to California. In 1986, using an alias, he abandoned a young girl he called Lisa at a campground.
He even served time for that.
He did. Then his criminal history just gets worse. Until 2003, when he was arrested under yet another alias, Curtis Kimball.
And that was for the 2002 murder and dismemberment of his then-wife, Unsoon June, in California.
That arrest, under the Kimball alias, was the break they needed. It finally gave investigators his DNA profile.
And they could connect the dots.
All of them. They tested the DNA of the child, Lisa, who was abandoned in 1986. It confirmed she was Denise Bowden's daughter, but not Evans's biological child.
So at this point, they were sure Evans had murdered Denise Bowden.
Just as he had murdered Unsoon June. But the most critical DNA finding was the direct link to the Allenstown Four.
The scientific smoking gun.
Absolutely. The DNA testing on the Bear Brook remains confirmed that Robert Bob Evans was the biological father of the middle child.
The 2 to 4-year-old victim.
Yes. The one who wasn't related to Marlise and her daughters. That DNA cemented his direct personal involvement in all 4 murders.
No Evans or Kimball. He died in prison in 2010. So police had his DNA, but they still didn't have his real name.
And that was the final agonizing gap. They only had his aliases. They couldn't search old records, couldn't find his family.
So they took a pretty drastic step.
They did. In June 2017, they released a police interview video, just hoping someone would recognize the man and give them his birth name. And that step was essentially the handoff to the world of genetic genealogy.
Which is where Barbara Rae-Venter comes in.
A pioneer in this field. She led the effort to use his DNA to build a family tree from scratch, working backward through consumer genealogy databases.
The goal wasn't just to find one relative.
No, it was to build a tree big enough that they could trace distant cousins, find a set of common great-grandparents, and then work forward to find the one male relative whose known life history just appeared around the mid-1970s.
An incredible amount of work. And it paid off.
It did, almost immediately. Just 2 months later, August 2017, they had their man.
How did they confirm it?
Through Y-DNA testing, which traces the direct paternal line, using a sample from a child from his first legitimate marriage, Robert Evans was confirmed as Terry Peter Rasmussen.
And they finally had a real name, a real history.
Born 1943 in Denver, Colorado. The sources show this very specific window where he just vanishes from his legal life.
Tell me about that.
He married in 1968, had 4 children between 69 and 72, lived a normal life in Phoenix, then Redwood City, California. But between 1973 and 74, his wife left him.
And that's when he disappeared.
His family last saw him around Christmas, 1974. That's the moment he drops off the grid and begins his new life as Robert Evans, starting his transient, murderous path as the Chameleon Killer.
And that name, Chameleon Killer, it's because he used his identity as a weapon.
As a weapon and a shield. The sources say he used at least 5 different aliases. He moved between identities and states with ease, exploiting the lack of centralized databases and preying on people who were isolated from their families.
So the identification of Rasmussen was a landmark case.
One of the first major cases where investigative genetic genealogy was used to identify a suspect who had been dead for years. It proved the methodology could solve even the most impossible cold cases.
It's almost poetic in a way. The science that tracks identity is what finally unmasked a man who lived by shedding his.
It is. He would choose these common, forgettable names. Bob Evans let him blend into the Northeast. Curtis Kimball was a later identity in California. The ability to track all these through his DNA shows that even a master manipulator leaves a trail.
So with the killer finally identified as Terry Rasmussen, the last crucial step was giving his victims their names back.
And the mother and her 2 daughters were first. Their identification is this incredible story of a civilian web sleuth finding an almost 20-year-old social media post.
It's amazing how these things happen.
It really is. Back in 1999, Sarah Lynn McWater's younger half-brother, who had never even met her, posted on Ancestry.com just looking for his missing sister.
And that post just sat there.
For almost 2 decades, waiting for the right person to connect the dots.
And that person was Rebecca Heath, a librarian.
A dedicated web sleuth. She found that 1999 post in October 2018. She was researching the Bear Brook victims and realized the missing girl's mother, Marlise Honeychurch, had an older daughter too. The ages matched the 3 related victims perfectly.
And then came the final connection.
The final critical connection. A relative she contacted mentioned that Marlise Honeychurch had married a man with the last name, Rasmussen.
Wait, so it wasn't the alias Evans, it was his actual surname that sealed it.
Precisely. That one true surname provided the undeniable link between the missing Honeychurch family from La Puente, California, and the killer in New Hampshire, Terry Peter Rasmussen.
It also confirmed he'd likely moved them across the country.
Yes, the fact they were found so far from where they were last seen suggests he transported them either right before or right after the murders.
So on June 6, 2019, they finally had names.
New Hampshire investigators made the announcement. They were Marlise Elizabeth Honeychurch, born in 1954, her older daughter, Marie Elizabeth Vaughn, born 1971, and her younger daughter, Sarah Lynn McWaters, born 1977.
And their disappearance was traced back to La Puente, California, around Thanksgiving 1978.
A timeline that aligns perfectly with Rasmussen's known movements. Marlise had a big argument with her mother and just left with the girls, cutting off all contact.
Creating the perfect opportunity for someone like Rasmussen.
Exactly. It allowed him to murder them and dispose of their bodies hundreds of miles away in the anonymity of rural New Hampshire. There's even evidence Marlise may have used the alias Elizabeth Evans on legal documents in 1980, suggesting she was with him under his alias for over a year before her death.
That just leaves the final puzzle piece, the middle child. She was still only identified as Terry Rasmussen's daughter for 6 more years.
And the determination to give that one child her name is just astounding.
It required a whole secondary genealogical search.
A massive one. They had no records for her other than her DNA. They knew her father was Rasmussen, but they had to find her mother, a woman named Pepper Reed, who had also disappeared in the 1970s.
How do you even begin a search like that?
You build a family tree from scratch again, this time using the child's maternal DNA line. And the sources highlight how hard it was. They had to trace her mother's lineage all the way back to relatives in Pearl River County, Mississippi,
Which led them on this deep historical journey.
linking her line to a very distant ancestor, Thomas Deadhorse Mitchell, who was born way back in 1836.
So they built a family tree back 150 years just to find the mother of one victim.
That's what it took. They traced collateral lines, cousins, second cousins, until the pattern converged on Pepper Reed, who was confirmed as the biological mother.
And that effort finally culminated in the last identification.
In September 2025, the middle child was positively identified as Rhea Rasmussen, Terry Peter Rasmussen's daughter, born in 1976 in Orange County, California.
The science was still being refined even then.
It was. It's noteworthy that initial DNA analysis had suggested she had a slight mixed heritage, but updated testing in 2024 revealed she was of full European descent. That refinement is so important for presenting the most accurate, dignified portrait of the victim.
So they all finally had their names back. A measure of closure.
A measure of closure. In November 2019, Marlise and Marie received a new headstone in Allenstown with their names on it. Sarah was laid to rest in Connecticut, closer to her father's family.
And the sources mention the shared mourning among the families.
Yes, family members from Marlise's side attended the service, and so did Rasmussen's daughter from his first marriage. It was this moment of profound, shared sorrow.
When you look back at it all, it is just an incredible story of persistence, of technology, and of human connection.
It is. A mystery spanning 40 years, thousands of miles, finally solved by forensic science that was completely unimagined when those bodies were first found.
And the enduring lesson here is the pattern of deception used by Rasmussen, the chameleon killer.
He specialized in exploiting people who had lost contact with their families. He used his aliases to move between states and just escape detection for decades.
And the sources are very clear that the Allenstown Four, the murder of Unsoon June, and the likely murder of Denise Bowden. That's probably not the end of the list.
That's the chilling implication, the belief that he is linked to likely more homicides. Investigators are still trying to map his movements during the late 70s and early 80s.
But now they have a methodology.
They do. They can search for other unidentified female victims or missing persons whose timelines and locations overlap with Rasmussen's known routes in the West and the Northeast.
The case is a stark reminder of the vulnerability of people who cross paths with manipulative individuals like him. The science provided the answers, but the story itself is one of profound tragedy.
And absolute persistence.
So that leaves us with this final thought for you to consider. Given Rasmussen's aliases, his transient lifestyle, and the fact he's linked to at least 5 homicides with the belief that there are likely more, what other cold cases across the country might eventually be linked to the chameleon killer now that we have his DNA and timeline established and investigators know precisely where to look? Thanks for listening.